What if the person you ignored turned out to be the smartest one in the building? Every morning before the sun reached the glass towers of downtown Atlanta, Clarice Bell slipped through the back entrance of Varelli Global Solutions. Her janitor's badge beeped softly against the scanner. No one noticed, no one ever did, and she preferred it that way. At 42, Clarice had mastered the art of moving quietly. She pushed her cart past glass-walled boardrooms, wiped fingerprints from chrome elevator buttons, and vacuumed the same conference rugs where executives whispered about market expansions and vendor deals. No one looked twice. Sometimes they didn't look at all. But that Monday morning, things shifted. She had just finished wiping down the touchscreen directory in the main lobby when she heard someone ask in halting Mandarin for directions to the 12th floor meeting suites. The concierge blinked helpless. Clarice stepped forward. With calm clarity, she answered the question fluently, gently, precisely. She even pointed toward the elevator bank and gave the man a warm nod. He bowed in thanks. A second later, a delivery driver struggling with forms approached. Spanish. Clarice answered again without skipping a beat. Then a French-speaking vendor muttered about mislabeled supplies. She corrected him, politely switching languages for the third time in less than 2 minutes. None of this was rehearsed. It was muscle memory. Across the lobby, Michael Hanover, CEO of Varelli, stood frozen mid-step, coffee in hand. He watched her, not just the words she spoke, but how she moved, confident, steady, invisible, until now. She caught his gaze briefly. Her expression didn't change. She dipped her head respectfully and turned to retrieve her cart. That's when Michael called out, "Excuse me, was that Mandarin you just spoke?" Clarice turned. "Yes, sir." He stepped closer. "And Spanish, French?" She nodded once. "Yes, sir." A beat passed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clarice Bell." There was no trace of surprise or arrogance in her voice, just facts quietly offered. Michael tilted his head. "Miss Bell, do you have a moment?" She hesitated, not from fear, but from instinct. People like her weren't often invited upstairs. Still, she nodded. And for the first time in 14 years, Clarice Bell followed someone not to clean a room, but to be heard in one. What if fluency wasn't just in language, but in resilience? The elevator hummed softly as it ascended toward the top floor. Clarice stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the faint scent of citrus cleaner still clinging to her sleeves. Across from her, Michael Hanover glanced over with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. She spoke first. "I've worked here 14 years, she said, voice steady. Never been past the 10th floor. Michael gave a faint smile. "That's going to change." Clarice nodded but didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the digital floor numbers as they ticked upward. When the doors opened, the air shifted. The executive suite gleamed mahogany paneling, framed world maps, thick carpet that muted footsteps. Clarice stepped carefully, her work shoes, too quiet for a place like this. Michael led her to a sleek glass-walled office. Inside, he gestured toward a chair across from his desk. "Please." She sat with care, hands folded in her lap. So he began, leaning forward. "I heard Mandarin, Spanish, and French." "How many languages do you speak?" Clarice didn't hesitate. 5 fluently. Mandarin, Spanish, French, Swahili, and Italian. His eyebrows rose. No hesitation. "No reason to lie," she said simply. "Any formal training? I studied linguistics," she replied. 2 years into a master's before I had to come home. He caught the shift in her tone, slight but solid. Clarice looked out the window briefly, then back at him. "My mother got sick. Then my father passed. I had a baby. Rent came faster than degrees." Michael didn't interrupt. "But I kept studying," she continued. "Books, audio recordings, newspapers. Libraries don't charge for curiosity." There was no pride in her voice, no bitterness either, just lived-in fact. "Most people see the uniform," she said, "and assume I don't have much to say." Michael exhaled, sitting back. "They'd be wrong." Clarice gave a small, closed-lipped smile. "Yes, sir, they usually are." In that quiet, sterile office lined with accolades and international awards, Michael Hanover realized something unsettling. The most qualified person in his building hadn't been in any of the interviews. She'd been polishing the doorknobs outside them. What happens when no one asks, so no one knows? Michael folded his hands on the desk, watching Clarice with a focus usually reserved for investors. "I'd like to understand," he said. "How does someone like you, someone with your skill, end up mopping floors?" Clarice didn't flinch. She'd heard that tone before. Curious, slightly patronizing. But something about Michael felt different. Less judgment, more surprise. She inhaled slowly. "I was born and raised in Macon. Only child. My dad fixed boilers. My mom was a nurse's aide. They didn't have much, but they had expectations." He nodded. "Education top of my class. Full scholarship to Spelman. I majored in linguistics. Started my master's at Emory. My plan was to work in diplomacy, or maybe teach abroad." Her gaze drifted briefly to the skyline beyond his office window. "Then my mother got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. My dad tried to manage, but it got worse. I came home to help. A year later, he had a stroke. Just gone." Michael said nothing, letting the silence stretch respectfully. "I had to drop out. Found out I was pregnant. The father left before my daughter was born. I worked nights. Grocery stores, temp agencies, cleaning jobs. Whatever I could find that let me be there when she needed me." She paused, adjusting the sleeves of her janitor's uniform, like they didn't quite belong on her. "I took the night shift here because it was steady, quiet, paid enough to keep the lights on and the fridge full." Michael leaned forward slightly. "And the languages you kept them, I never stopped." Her voice sharpened, finally showing a flicker of pride. "I borrowed textbooks, watched international news, read newspapers in French and Spanish just to stay fluent. Some people knit, some jog. I study languages. It's the only part of myself I never gave up." He sat back, absorbing it all, the intelligence, the loss, the endurance. Clarice tilted her head. No one ever asked before. They saw the mop, not the mind. Michael looked at her, genuinely moved. "Well, I'm asking now." She gave a faint nod, but her eyes said more than words ever could. "Not everyone who's quiet is hiding. Some are just waiting for the right moment to speak. What if your first real opportunity came while holding a mop?" The next morning, Clarice was halfway through disinfecting the east lobby when a voice crackled through her earpiece. "Clarice, can you come to 4B executive request?" She froze mid-swipe. Executive. A minute later, she stood outside conference room 4B, mop still in hand, unsure if she was supposed to knock. The door opened before she decided. It was Michael Hanover again this time, looking a little less corporate and a little more hurried. "Miss Bell, sorry for the short notice," he said. "We have a meeting starting in 2 minutes. Delegates from our Milan and São Paulo branches arrived early. Our translator canceled last night." "I remembered what you told me." Clarice blinked. "You want me to translate if you're willing," he said. "I know it's not your job, but after yesterday?" She nodded once. "Italian or Portuguese, both." She stepped in. The room fell quiet as she entered, still in her burgundy uniform, hair tied back, gloves folded in one pocket. 4 executives, 2 from Brazil, 2 from Italy, looked up puzzled. She greeted each of them in their native tongue with flawless pronunciation and respectful poise. Conversation began, first hesitant, then fluid. Clarice moved with ease, translating not just words, but tone, adjusting humor. Reading pauses, catching context, most software missed. She didn't interrupt, she didn't over-explain, she made space. When one of the Brazilian delegates cracked a joke in Portuguese, she translated it with the right rhythm, and the whole room laughed. Not politely, genuinely. Michael sat back and watched as the mood shifted from formality to collaboration. Clarice wasn't just filling in for a translator. She was bridging a cultural gap the company had struggled with for months. After 30 minutes, the meeting wrapped. One Italian exec turned to Michael and said in English, "She's better than the agency we paid $10,000 a quarter for." "Where did you find her?" Michael smiled. "Right here." Clarice, meanwhile, was already gathering empty espresso cups. As they left the room, Michael caught up with her. "You've done this before." "Not officially," she replied. "Just helped folks' hospitals, DMV school meetings. No certificate, no time. My daughter came first." He nodded slowly. "You still wearing that uniform tomorrow?" She looked at him, one brow raised. "You still asking small questions?" Michael laughed. He had no idea she was just getting started. What if the most overlooked person became the solution no one saw coming? The next morning, Clarice found herself once again riding the elevator to the top floor, but this time she wasn't summoned. She was invited. Michael Hanover stood at his office window sipping coffee when she entered. "Come in, Miss Bell," he said without turning. "We need to talk." Clarice sat down across from his desk, posture straight, expression cautious. "I've thought a lot about what happened yesterday," he began. "You didn't just fill in. You elevated that meeting. You made everyone in the room feel heard, respected, and that's not easy to do, especially in uniform." Clarice didn't respond. She had learned long ago to wait before reacting to praise. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "A position that doesn't currently exist, but should." She raised an eyebrow. "Doing what? Cultural liaison. Someone who can navigate languages, cultures, contracts, client meetings, everything we've been fumbling through with expensive consultants and half-trained staff." Clarice blinked. "You want me to work here? On this floor?" He smiled. "Yes. In this building, but in a real office. Title, salary, benefits. Full-time." She looked down at her hands. "I don't have a degree, Mr. Hanover. No certifications. You have fluency, composure, lived experience. You've already solved more problems in 48 hours than some of our execs have in 6 months." Clarice let out a slow breath. "Why me?" "Because you've been underestimated. And you're still standing." She studied him, searching for strings. Pity? PR stunt. But all she saw was sincerity, and the uniform. She asked softly. He smiled. "You can keep it. Frame it, burn it, wear it to Halloween parties, I don't care. You won't need it anymore." Clarice exhaled slowly. The weight of years swept through her nights, missed chances, postponed brilliance shelved in favor of survival. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's see what happens when you give the right person the right seat at the table." Michael extended his hand, and Clarice Bell shook it, not as a janitor, but as a woman finally seen. What happens when you rise, and others feel left behind? By Wednesday morning, Clarice Bell had a nameplate on her new office door. It was small matte silver, clean black letters, Clarice Bell Cultural Liaison. She stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary, fingers brushing the edge, still half waiting for someone to tell her it was a mistake. But no one did. Instead, people noticed. Whispers moved faster than the elevators. "Isn't she the janitor? I heard she speaks like 5 languages. Probably some diversity hire. No degree, no corporate background, and she's in an office." Clarice walked through it all like mist, present but untouchable. Some staff smiled. Others looked through her like she was still mopping floors. The tension wasn't overt, but it was heavy. Eye contact lingered too long. Polite greetings came out forced. One executive in marketing didn't even bother hiding her frown when they passed in the hallway. But Clarice had work to do. In her first 3 days, she revised 2 multilingual contracts with translation errors that had delayed a Morocco deal for months. She advised the facilities team on better signage for international clients. She mediated a phone call with frustrated French vendors and diffused it in under 7 minutes. Still, the uniform clung to her reputation like static. Even out of it. Late Thursday afternoon, she returned from a client briefing to find something new outside her office door. On the whiteboard where meeting notes usually went, someone had written in careful block letters, "We see you." No name, no decoration, just 3 words. She stared at it for a long time, chest tight. Because it wasn't just a message, it was acknowledgement. And in a building full of sleek suits, overpriced resumes, and polite gatekeeping, that meant more than applause ever could. But not everyone was celebrating. In quiet corners and closed-door meetings, people were already asking questions, demanding explanations. How had a woman with no degree and a cleaning schedule suddenly been handed influence? Clarice knew what was coming. She'd climbed enough stairs in silence to recognize the sound of pressure building. But this time, she wasn't carrying a mop. She was carrying proof. What do you say? When someone powerful demands to know how you got here, Clarice Bell was summoned to the 17th floor on a Thursday afternoon, not by her boss, but by someone much higher. Eleanor Craig, senior board member, sharp-suited and sharper-tongued with a reputation that made even directors sit straighter. Clarice walked into the glass-walled conference room. Eleanor didn't stand, didn't offer a smile, Have a seat, she said without looking up. Clarice sat. Eleanor flipped through a slim file. No degree, no management certification, no international business background, just janitorial employment and a linguistics hobby. That accurate? Clarice didn't blink. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, measured. So explain something to me, Miss Bell. How does a woman like you land an executive-level position in less than a week? Clarice inhaled slowly. Because I speak 5 languages fluently. Because I helped translate 2 mismanaged contracts. Because I resolved a stalled Morocco deal and eased tension with Brazilian partners all in 3 days. Eleanor tilted her head. You think this company runs on instinct and charm? No, ma'am. I think it runs on results. And that's what I've delivered. The room went quiet. A clock ticked on the wall. Eleanor's fingers tapped her pen once, twice, then stopped. You're a risk, Clarice. I've been a risk my entire life, Clarice replied. And I'm still here. For a long second, they stared at each other. Then Eleanor stood, closed the folder, and without a word left the room. Clarice sat there, her pulse steady. She didn't flinch, didn't crumble. She simply breathed. Outside, the hallway felt colder than when she'd entered. But as she passed a nearby whiteboard, someone had written again, same block letters. We still see you, Clarice paused. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. No mop, no doubt, just steel in her spine and purpose in her step. They could question her presence, but they couldn't question her impact. Not anymore. How do you lead when the room was never built for you by Monday morning? Clarice Bell's calendar was filled vendor calls, cultural audits, 3 translation requests, and a staff workshop on international etiquette. She hadn't even touched her coffee before someone knocked gently on her door. It was Bao, a quiet Vietnamese intern from logistics. Ms. Bell, he began, nervous. Can I ask how you learned all those languages? Clarice smiled softly. 1 word at a time, same way you will. Bao blinked, then grinned. I believe you. Word was spreading. Not just about her promotion, but her presence. Clarice didn't just sit in her office. She walked the halls. She asked names. She remembered them. She offered interns advice before presentations and corrected executives' cultural faux pas without shaming them. And still, the whispers lingered. She got lucky. She's just a symbol. But the results kept coming. Clarice uncovered a clause in a Dubai contract that had been costing the company thousands. She rewrote onboarding materials for international hires in 4 languages. She led a conversation with new vendors from Ghana, slipping between English and French, with ease, making everyone in the room feel like they belonged. One afternoon, Kellerman joined her in the break room. Been hearing good things, he said. I've been trying to ignore the bad ones, Clarice replied, sipping her tea. You're making waves. That a compliment or a warning? He smiled. Around here, both. He paused, then added, I've been thinking about launching a program for internal talent, people working non-desk roles. You think there are more like you here? Clarice didn't hesitate. There are. They just haven't been seen yet. You want to help build it? I already started, she said, tapping her notebook. By month's end, the initiative launched a pilot program called Voice Inside, aimed at developing overlooked employees through language support, leadership training, and cross-department mentorship. It was Clarice's idea, and it was working. She wasn't just changing workflows. She was shifting the culture, not with power, not with noise, but 1 word at a time. And people were finally listening. What happens when the building that overlooked you starts to carry your legacy? Clarice hadn't asked for recognition. She hadn't wanted attention, just the chance to be useful, to be seen. But that Friday, the company made a quiet move that said more than applause ever could. The main training hall, where every intern, team lead, and incoming executive went through orientation, had a new plaque. No press, no ribbon cutting, just clean steel letters. The Bell Room, named for Clarice Bell, whose voice reminded us who we miss when we fail to look deeper. She saw it after lunch, walking back from the second-floor conference with translation notes in hand. At first she froze, then she laughed softly, shaking her head like someone reading their name in a dream. The receptionist near the door whispered, "You earned that." Clarice didn't reply, just smiled. That afternoon, Kellerman stood outside the Bell Room as a new group of interns filed in. One leaned to another, pointing at the nameplate. "Who's that? She used to clean this place," came the answer. "Now she runs half the building." By the end of the day, another note appeared on Clarice's desk. No signature, just handwriting she didn't recognize. "My mother's a cafeteria worker. She speaks 4 languages. Today I told her I was proud. Because of you." Clarice sat down, hands still, heart loud. She didn't cry. She didn't need to, because this was never about being the first. It was about not being the last. The next morning, she hosted the first Voice Inside seminar. 10 employees from janitorial food service and night security. Nervous, quiet, waiting to see if this was real. She began with a story, her story. And when she finished, one woman whispered, "I didn't think someone like me could get this far." Clarice just smiled and handed her a folder. "Let's start with the basics," she said. "Pick your first language. We'll take it one word at a time. Because doors don't just open. Sometimes you have to hold them open for the next person too. What if the person you overlooked yesterday becomes the reason your company thrives tomorrow?" By the following quarter, Voice Inside wasn't just a pilot, it was a movement. Other departments were asking to join. Executives who once raised eyebrows at Clarice were now asking her opinion before finalizing international deals. She hadn't changed, but the lens through which people saw her had. One morning, Clarice was asked to speak at the Global Logistics Summit in Denver. The request had gone to Kellerman, but he forwarded it to her with a 2-word subject line. "You ready?" She was. At the summit, she stood in front of an audience of CEOs, directors, and HR leaders, all in tailored suits and polished shoes, and told them the truth. "I was never just a janitor. I was fluent. I was capable. I was ready, but nobody ever looked long enough to see it." The room didn't move. Then it stood. Full applause, full silence. On her way out, a young man approached her, teary-eyed. "My mom cleans office buildings, speaks 5 languages. I used to be embarrassed." Clarice touched his arm gently. "Never be ashamed of where you come from," she said. "Be ashamed of staying blind to brilliance." By the end of that week, Clarice had mentored 2 new hires, translated a 47-page contract into French, and caught an HR policy that inadvertently excluded non-native speakers from applying for upper-level training. She didn't boast. She just fixed it. And people noticed. More notes appeared. Some slipped under her door, others left on her desk. "You make me feel like I belong. My dad was a janitor. You make me proud of that. You gave me the courage to apply." And then came the one that stopped her cold. "I used to think I'd never be seen. But you proved that talent has no dress code. Thank you for wearing yours with pride." Clarice folded that note and placed it beside her old janitor badge in her desk drawer, not to forget, but to remember, because true change doesn't start with applause. It starts when one person is brave enough to break the pattern, then holds the door for others to walk through too.